Have you ever witnessed a moment where arrogance meets its match?
I don't shake hands with employees, Victoria Sterling declared disdainfully, visibly recoiling when Daniel Carter extended his hand in greeting. A sharp silence filled the Sterling Dynamics boardroom where 5 executives watched the scene with discreet smiles of approval.
Daniel remained motionless for a few seconds, his hand still outstretched before calmly lowering it.
At 42, this elegantly poised black man had faced similar situations throughout his life, but something in his eyes revealed that this time would be different. I understand perfectly, Daniel replied with disturbing serenity, discreetly adjusting the watch on his wrist, a gesture that no one in the room could interpret correctly. Victoria, CEO and heiress to the Sterling Dynamics empire, examined Daniel from head to toe with barely concealed contempt. His expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair contrasted with the deliberate simplicity of the clothes Daniel had chosen for this meeting, a strategic decision she had completely misread.
I assume you are the consultant sent by our investors, she said, emphasizing the word consultant as if it were an insult.
I hope you won't take up too much of our time.
People like me have important schedules.
3 hours earlier, Daniel had arrived at the lobby of Sterling Dynamics exactly as planned, dressed modestly, driving an ordinary car with no visible signs of his true identity. What Victoria and her team didn't know was that Daniel Carter controlled Carter Global Investments, a fund that managed over $60 billion and was considering injecting $4 billion into Sterling Dynamics. The receptionist had instructed him to wait in the common area for 40 minutes, completely ignoring his polite attempts to confirm the appointment. 2 security guards passed him 3 times, clearly instructed to observe his presence. Each slight was mentally catalogued by Daniel, who understood perfectly the test he was applying to the company. Our numbers speak for themselves, Victoria continued, leafing through papers without looking directly at Daniel. I don't see the need to explain complex concepts to someone who probably wouldn't understand our strategic vision.
Daniel nodded silently, his hands folded in his lap as he watched every movement, every word, every gesture of contempt being carefully filed away in his memory. The small recording device in his pocket captured every syllable of the most embarrassing presentation Victoria would ever give in her life.
Any questions?
Victoria asked at the end of a superficial and condescending presentation, glancing at her watch as if every second in Daniel's presence was an unbearable waste.
Just one, Daniel replied, his voice maintaining the same calm tone he had used from the beginning.
Do you really believe that this behavior represents the values that a partner company should demonstrate? Prepare to be shocked, could this be the turning point? Victoria laughed loudly, exchanging amused glances with the other executives.
Values, Mr. Carter.
Our only values are profit and results. I hope your superiors understand that when you report back.
While Victoria and her team reveled in what they interpreted as intellectual superiority, Daniel allowed himself an almost imperceptible smile. There in front of all the contemptuous stares, he stood firm like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this story of prejudice and reversal touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the Black Voices channel to find out how 5 minutes of arrogance would turn into the most devastating fall the corporate world has ever witnessed. Victoria Sterling continued her presentation as if Daniel were invisible, addressing only the other executives in the room. As you can see, our numbers exceed all growth expectations, she said, pointing to charts on the wall with a gold laser pointer.
Excuse me, Daniel said calmly, but those revenue figures don't match the public reports from last quarter. There's a discrepancy of approximately $300 million. The silence that followed was awkward. Victoria turned slowly, her face contorted into an expression of barely contained irritation. Excuse me, but do you have experience in financial analysis of companies of our caliber?
Some, Daniel replied, maintaining the same calm tone that was clearly frustrating her.
Victoria laughed loudly, exchanging exasperated glances with James Morrison, her vice president. James, can you believe this?
He thinks he understands our numbers better than our own finance team. Morrison, a 50-year-old man with an air of superiority, leaned forward. Mr. Carter, I imagine your supervisors sent you here with some kind of checklist to fill out.
How about we simplify this? Tell us exactly what you need to hear so we can end this meeting. Daniel had faced this kind of behavior throughout his career.
At 18, while still an intern at a small Chicago brokerage firm,
he watched as wealthy clients treated black employees like inferior beings. At 25, when he tried to pitch his first independent investment proposal, he was kicked out of 3 consecutive offices before he even got a chance to speak. But every rejection, every look of contempt, every racist comment disguised as professional concern had forged in him an unshakable determination. While others gave up, Daniel studied 18 hours a day, memorized financial reports like poems, and developed an intuition for markets that bordered on the supernatural. Actually, Daniel said, adjusting his watch again, a gesture he had already made 3 times. I'm more interested in understanding the corporate culture of this company, its core values. Victoria let out a genuinely amused laugh. Values. Our only value is excellence, and we recognize excellence when we see it. She paused dramatically, examining Daniel from head to toe, something that is clearly not present in this room. The comment elicited muffled laughter from the other executives. Daniel remained impassive, but his phone vibrated discreetly in his pocket. A message from his assistant, Marcus, who was monitoring the situation at Carter Global's office. Ready to execute Phase 2 when authorized. Victoria, encouraged by her team's reaction, decided to intensify the humiliation. You see, Mr. Carter, companies like Sterling Dynamics operate at a level that requires a certain refinement, proper education, the right connections, experience in circles where real decisions are made. She walked over to the panoramic window overlooking the city's financial center. I imagine it must be difficult for someone like you to comprehend the complexity of the operations we conduct here. It's not personal, you understand. It's simply reality. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I understand your perspective perfectly, Miss Sterling. It's interesting how some people confuse inherited privilege with earned competence. The observation struck a raw nerve. Victoria spun around, her face red with indignation. How dare you? My family built this company from the ground up. With an initial loan of $50 million from your grandfather's trust fund, Daniel replied softly. Public information, by the way. James Morrison slammed his fist on the table. This has gone too far. Who do you think you are to speak to Mrs. Sterling like that? For a moment, Daniel allowed his eyes to reveal a spark of the power he kept so carefully hidden. Someone who knows the real value of things, Mr. Morrison. Victoria took a deep breath, clearly struggling to regain her composure. Very well. If you want to play auditor, let's give you something to audit. She pressed the intercom. Jennifer, bring me the Meridian Project reports. All of them. The confidential ones, too, ma'am, asked the secretary's voice, especially the confidential ones. Our consultant here seems to have plenty of time for detailed analysis. What Victoria didn't know was that Daniel had already discreetly accessed the Meridian Project reports through completely legal channels, information available to any serious investor. The project was 3 years behind schedule and $600 million over budget with clear evidence of mismanagement and possible corruption. While waiting for the documents, Victoria made a point of commenting loudly to Morrison. It's amazing how some people don't recognize when they're clearly out of their league. Daniel smiled discreetly, thinking of his office 6 blocks away, where a team of 15 elite financial analysts, graduates of Harvard, MIT, and Wharton, awaited his instructions. He also thought of the phone call he had received the previous morning from a CEO of Goldman Sachs, asking for advice on a $12 billion acquisition. Every word of contempt, every condescending glance was being carefully catalogued, not only in his memory, but on the high-quality recording device he carried. In a 40-minute meeting, Victoria Sterling and her team had provided enough evidence of discrimination to destroy her reputation forever. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat. Daniel Carter wasn't just a patient man. He was a strategist who understood that the best revenge is built brick by brick, word by word, until it forms an impregnable fortress of justice. As Victoria Sterling continued her performance of superiority, handing Daniel a stack of documents as if it were a burden he deserved to carry, his phone vibrated discreetly on the table. It was a message from his CFO. Urgent meeting cancelled. Lead investor has postponed decision on the $4 billion. No reason given. Victoria's face twitched slightly, but she quickly masked her concern. Pros never come alone, she muttered, looking at Daniel as if he were personally responsible for all the inconveniences of her morning. Any difficulties? Asked Daniel, his voice maintaining that irritating serenity that made her increasingly frustrated. Nothing for someone like you to worry about, Victoria replied, furiously typing a response. Complex international investment issues, concepts that require sophisticated experience. What Victoria couldn't know was that 6 blocks away, Marcus Thompson, Daniel's right-hand man for 8 years, was executing the first phase of a meticulously planned operation. With a degree in finance from the University of Chicago and a specialization in risk analysis, Marcus had learned from Daniel that the best strategies are built on patience and precision. Phase 1 complete. Marcus typed into his phone, watching the Sterling Dynamics building from his office window. Contacts at Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan alerted to ethical concerns at Sterling. $4 billion investment officially suspended pending investigation. The relationship between Daniel and Marcus had been born out of a situation similar to the one Daniel now faced. 8 years ago, Marcus was a brilliant young analyst at a Wall Street consulting firm, constantly passed over for promotions despite his exceptional results. Daniel, already established as an independent investor, had witnessed Marcus being publicly humiliated by a senior partner during a presentation to important clients. On that occasion, Daniel had done something few would have expected. He waited until the end of the presentation, approached Marcus discreetly, and offered him a position at his then small investment firm. I recognize talent when I see it, Daniel had said. And I also recognize when someone is being deliberately underestimated. Marcus never forgot that gesture. Together, they had built Carter Global Investments from the ground up, transforming it into the financial powerhouse it was today. More than business partners, they were soldiers in a silent war against the systemic discrimination they both knew intimately. Back in the Sterling Dynamics conference room, Victoria handed Daniel a folder filled with contracts and reports. Here are the Meridian project documents you were so eager to review, she said with venomous sarcasm. I'm sure you'll find challenging to follow our advanced methodology. Daniel opened the folder calmly, his eyes scanning the documents with a speed that surprised even James Morrison. Within 15 minutes, he had identified 3 serious accounting irregularities, 2 possible cases of overbilling, and a clear violation of federal environmental regulations. Interesting approach in item 7.3, Daniel commented, pointing to a specific line. Reclassifying operating costs as research investments may work in the short term, but it will certainly catch the attention of federal auditors. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison exchanged a nervous glance with Victoria, who for the first time since the meeting began looked genuinely uncomfortable. How did you? Morrison began, but stopped, clearly disturbed by the accuracy of Daniel's observation. Experience, Daniel replied simply, continuing to flip through the documents. And I also noticed that the productivity figures reported here don't match the public energy consumption data for the Ohio plant, a discrepancy of about 22%. Victoria felt a bead of sweat roll down her forehead. That was information that only someone with access to very specific data could know. Who exactly are you? She asked, her voice losing its tone of absolute superiority for the first time. Daniel smiled discreetly, the same smile he had learned to use during years of being underestimated. Just someone who pays attention to details, Miss Sterling. At that moment, Victoria's phone rang again. It was her corporate lawyer, Dr. Peterson, with unusual urgency in his voice. Victoria, I need to talk to you immediately. We've received an informal notification from the SEC about a possible investigation into Sterling Dynamics. Something related to irregular accounting practices. Victoria paled visibly. That's impossible, she whispered. Our accounting is impeccable. Apparently, someone has provided very specific information about the Meridian project, Dr. Peterson continued. Details that suggest an intimate knowledge of our internal operations. As Victoria struggled to process this devastating information, Daniel watched her growing anxiety with the same serenity he had maintained throughout the meeting. Every word of contempt, every gesture of superiority had been carefully catalogued. But more importantly, it had served as the time Marcus needed to execute the first phase of his strategy.
Daniel Carter was not just a patient man. He was a strategist who had learned that true revenge is not built on anger, but on the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to strike for maximum impact. For years, he had collected information on companies like Sterling Dynamics, not out of malice, but because he recognized the patterns of corruption and discrimination that always went hand in hand. Sterling Dynamics, with its facade of corporate excellence, was actually a house of cards built on shady practices and held up by the arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. And Daniel, sitting patiently in that room while being humiliated, was about to knock down every card with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying exactly how these houses come tumbling down. "Everything okay over there?" Daniel asked innocently, watching Victoria hang up the phone with visibly trembling hands. Victoria forced a smile, but her eyes revealed the growing panic that was beginning to take over her mind. "Just minor administrative issues," she lied, unaware that every second of contempt she had shown was irreversibly sealing her fate. What she couldn't imagine was that the man sitting across from her wasn't just a victim of her prejudice. He was the architect of her ruin, and construction had already begun. Victoria's phone rang for the fourth time in 15 minutes. This time it was Jennifer, her secretary, her voice trembling with panic. "Miss Sterling, the financial press is calling nonstop. The Wall Street Journal wants a statement on the allegations of racial discrimination at the company." "Racial discrimination," Victoria repeated, her voice rising an octave. "What on earth are they talking about?" Daniel watched Victoria's growing agitation with the same serenity he had maintained throughout the meeting. Discreetly, he took out his phone and typed a single word. Now, 6 blocks away, Marcus received the message and smiled. "Phase 2 authorized," he said to his team of 5 analysts waiting at their computers. "Release everything." Within seconds, a 43-minute audio file was simultaneously sent to 17 financial journalists, 12 civil rights activists, and 27 institutional investors in Sterling Dynamics. The file contained every contemptuous word, every racist comment, every moment of humiliation Victoria had inflicted on Daniel during the meeting. "I don't shake hands with employees," Victoria's arrogant voice echoed through loudspeakers in newsrooms across the country. "People like me have important agendas. It's just reality. Someone like you." Victoria was still trying to process the call about discrimination when James Morrison burst into the room, his face red with panic. "Victoria, we need to talk now. There are recordings of you circulating online. Extremely compromising comments. Recordings." Victoria spun around to face Daniel, her eyes finally showing a spark of real suspicion. You recorded our meeting." Daniel smiled calmly, pulling a small professional recording device from his pocket. "I recorded every word, Miss Sterling. Every gesture of contempt, every prejudiced comment, every moment you chose to humiliate someone you believe to be inferior." "That's illegal," Morrison shouted, lunging toward Daniel. "Actually," Daniel replied, his voice remaining annoyingly calm. "In New York State, only one party needs to consent to the recording of a conversation in which they are participating. I consented to my own recording." At that moment, Victoria's desk phone exploded into a ringing frenzy. It was Richard Blackstone, chairman of the board of Sterling Dynamics, and his voice came through the speakerphone with controlled fury. "Victoria, you have exactly 5 minutes to explain why our company is being associated with racist comments that are spreading like wildfire on the internet." Victoria tried to respond, but Blackstone continued relentlessly. "Carter Global Investments' $4 billion investment was officially canceled an hour ago. They cited fundamental ethical concerns as the reason." "Carter Global?" Victoria repeated, confused. "But our investor was Johnson Financial." "There is no Johnson Financial," Daniel said softly, rising from his chair for the first time since the meeting began. "It's always been Carter Global Investments. My company." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at Daniel as if she were seeing him for the first time, her brain struggling to process the devastating information she had just received. You're Daniel Carter," she whispered, her voice a mere thread. "CEO and founder of Carter Global Investments," Daniel confirmed, pulling a gold business card from his pocket and placing it gently on the table.
$2 billion in assets under management, listed by Forbes as one of the 50 most influential investors in the world. Morrison grabbed the card with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the embossed credentials. Harvard Business School, former Goldman Sachs, member of the advisory board of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Over the past 6 months, Daniel continued, my team has thoroughly evaluated Sterling Dynamics as a candidate for our largest investment of the year. For $1 billion that would make this company the absolute leader in its industry. Victoria slumped in her chair, the weight of realization crushing her arrogance like a sledgehammer shattering glass. 6 months of evaluation. 6 months of observing how your company treats smaller suppliers, employees from different backgrounds, visitors who don't fit your aesthetic standard of success, Daniel explained. Today was my final test, an assessment of the ethical leadership of this organization. The phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but the director of corporate ethics for the National Association of Technology Companies. Ms. Sterling, our organization has just voted unanimously to suspend Sterling Dynamics' participation in our events until an independent investigation into discriminatory practices is completed. Victoria hung up the phone, her hands shaking visibly. This will destroy our reputation. Your reputation, Daniel corrected gently, has been destroyed by your own words and actions. I simply documented who you really are when you think no one important is watching. At that moment, Morrison's cell phone vibrated with an urgent notification. It was a Google alert about Sterling Dynamics. In less than 2 hours, #SterlingRacism had become a trending topic on Twitter with over 200,000 posts sharing excerpts from Victoria's recording. The company's stock has fallen 18% in the last 2 hours, Morrison read aloud, his voice breaking. 3 major investors have already announced their complete withdrawal. Daniel watched Victoria process the magnitude of her fall. In a matter of hours, she had lost the largest investment in her company's history, destroyed her personal reputation, and become the national symbol of corporate prejudice. Why? Victoria finally asked, her voice small and defeated. Why did you do this to us? Daniel walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching below. Because companies like yours perpetuate a system where talent is judged by skin color, social background, or outward appearance. Because people like you use positions of power to humiliate those you consider inferior. He turned to face her directly. But mostly because I believe the business world can be better. It must be better. And sometimes for change to happen, examples need to be made. Victoria tried one last desperate gambit. We can work this out. Make a deal. Implement changes. The changes your company needs, Daniel replied, walking toward the door, can't be bought or negotiated. They must come from a leadership that truly understands the value of every human being, regardless of their background. Before leaving, Daniel stopped at the door and looked back one last time. I recorded this meeting not to destroy you, but to force you to face who you really are. What you do with this revelation will determine whether your company has a future or whether it will be just another example of how arrogance can destroy empires built on rotten foundations. As Daniel left the Sterling Dynamics building, Victoria remained seated in her office, surrounded by the wreckage of a reputation that had taken decades to build and only 2 hours to completely destroy. Outside, reporters were already beginning to gather at the entrance to the building. While on social media, the hashtag Justice for Daniel was gaining momentum with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of corporate discrimination. Daniel Carter's revenge had been executed with the surgical precision of a master strategist. But as Victoria contemplated the ruins of her empire, one question remained. Was it possible that something better could emerge from this destruction? Or would Sterling Dynamics join the graveyard of companies that chose prejudice over progress? 6 months after the episode that destroyed Sterling Dynamics, Daniel Carter looked out the window of his new office on the 52nd floor in Manhattan. The spectacular view of the city contrasted dramatically with a humble room where it had all begun years ago when he was still a young analyst struggling to be taken seriously. Carter Global Investments had grown exponentially since that fateful day. The video of his confrontation with Victoria, which had racked up over 8 million views, had turned Daniel into a national symbol of the fight against corporate discrimination. Invitations to speak at conferences arrive daily from universities, companies, and organizations around the world. Investment proposals have increased 40% since April, Marcus reported, entering the office with a stack of documents. And we have 17 companies specifically requesting our ethical audit before closing major deals.
Daniel smiled, remembering the irony.
Victoria had tried to humiliate him by questioning his competence in evaluating companies, and now his firm was sought after globally for exactly that. Carter Global had created a new standard in the market: investments conditional on proven ethical practices and sterling dynamics.
Daniel asked even though he already knew the answer. Bankrupt last week, Marcus replied.
Victoria lost everything: the mansion in the Hamptons, the yacht, even her apartment in Manhattan. She's living with her sister in Connecticut.
Daniel felt no satisfaction at Victoria's complete ruin.
His revenge had never been about personal destruction, but about creating systemic change that would prevent future injustices.
The fall of sterling dynamics would serve as a warning to the entire market. Companies that perpetuate discrimination will pay the highest possible price. The phone rang. It was Dr. Williams, Dean of Columbia University. Daniel, I would like to renew our invitation for you to give the inaugural lecture next semester. The topic would be business ethics and social responsibility. The students are extremely interested in hearing your perspective.
After hanging up, Daniel reflected on how his life had changed. 3 years ago, he had struggled to get meetings with small investors. Today, prestigious universities competed for his presence, and his ethical auditing methodology was being studied in business schools around the world.
Marcus approached the window. You know, she tried to get in touch several times, right, Victoria? She left 17 messages asking to talk. Daniel nodded.
He had listened to the messages, desperate pleas from a woman who had finally understood the magnitude of his actions.
But some lessons can only be learned through irreversible consequences. I got an interesting call today, Marcus continued. Johnson & Associates wants to implement our diversity protocol in all of its international branches.
43 countries, Daniel, 43 countries adopting standards that were born out of that humiliating meeting at Sterling. The transformation had spread far beyond New York. European, Asian, and South American companies began adopting the Carter Protocols, strict guidelines that ensured equal opportunity regardless of race, gender, or social background. What had started as a strategy to expose a discriminatory company had become a global movement. Daniel walked over to his desk where a framed photo showed his team of 50 employees, a diverse group of brilliant analysts who represented exactly the talent that companies like Sterling Dynamics used to ignore. Each hire was a small victory against the system that had once tried to limit him.
Remember that meeting?
Marcus asked, pointing to the wall where a discreet plaque displayed the date of the confrontation with Victoria. When we left that building, I thought we had simply documented another case of corporate bias.
And we did, Daniel replied.
But we also did something more important.
We proved that the best response to discrimination isn't anger or resentment. It's excellence.
It's building something bigger than those who try to diminish us could ever imagine.
The office door opened and Jennifer, his new executive assistant, announced the arrival of his next appointment.
It was a group of young Black and Latino entrepreneurs, participants in the mentoring program Daniel had created with a portion of his firm's profits. As the young people entered, Daniel remembered himself years ago, talented, determined, but facing invisible barriers that seemed insurmountable. Now he was the bridge that others crossed to achieve their own dreams.
Mr. Carter, said Maria, a 24-year-old woman who was developing an educational technology startup. I wanted to thank you for the initial investment.
Our company is already valued at $2 million. Daniel smiled, remembering his initial meeting with Maria 6 months earlier. She had been rejected by 16 different investors, all citing lack of experience or inappropriate market, the same euphemisms he knew so well. Your success is proof that talent and determination always overcome prejudice, Daniel replied.
You just needed someone to recognize your potential.
At the end of the meeting, as the young entrepreneurs left the office carrying hope and resources to turn their visions into reality, Daniel reflected on the true meaning of victory. Victoria Sterling had lost a company. He had gained the chance to change the world. Marcus approached with one last update for the day. Forbes magazine wants to put you on the cover of their special issue on ethical leadership. The headline would be "The Man Who Turned Humiliation into Revolution." Daniel declined politely. His story had never been about personal recognition, but about creating opportunities for others. The true measure of his success was not in the billions he managed, but in the hundreds of careers he had helped launch, and the thousands of minds he had inspired to never accept limitations imposed by prejudice. As the sun set over Manhattan, Daniel looked out at the city that had once seemed too hostile for someone like him. Now, every light that came on represented a possibility, every building an opportunity to build something better. Victoria Sterling had tried to teach him about his place in the world. In response, Daniel had completely redefined what that place could be, not just for himself, but for all those who would come after him. The best revenge Daniel had learned was not to destroy those who had hurt him. It was to build something so extraordinary that their limitations became irrelevant, turning every no into fuel for an even bigger yes. If this story of transformation and perseverance touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the Black Voices channel for more stories that prove that sometimes the greatest insults become the springboards for the greatest triumphs. Because in the end, true victory isn't about defeating your enemies. It's about surpassing them so spectacularly that they become irrelevant in the face of the greatness you've built.